We can now bring in our international affairs editor, Angela Diffley. Angela, good afternoon. How worried are European leaders from this latest statement from Donald Trump?
Well, it is quite a shocking statement. That said, we're not clear whether he actually said it or not. He says, "I told." It is nevertheless important to note that I think European leaders hope that wiser heads, of course, would prevail should Trump ever consider something like this, that his advisors would point out to him that it is not in the United States' interests to alienate Europe. It is not in US interests either to help Russia build an empire. So I think whilst they're worrying statements, this is nothing new, and Europe would hope that the grown-ups in the room, as everyone called them in that first Donald Trump term, would prevail. Trump already said back in 2018, he pointed to Montenegro, which had only joined NATO a year before, and said, I don't think it would be in US interests to help a small little country, an aggressive little country, he also called it, like Montenegro. And Article 5 of NATO states that any NATO member should come to the aid of any other NATO member which is attacked. All of this has been worrying European leaders for some time. And of course, Emmanuel Macron has for some time been promoting the idea of strategic autonomy and really trying to impress upon European leaders that Europe must become increasingly autonomous, not just economically, politically, but militarily, and that they cannot rely on the US. Trump's first term showed he's a wild card, and increasingly Europe must build its own autonomy. That said, within the European Union, for example, and within the rest of NATO, only the UK and France have nuclear weapons. So that is an enormous hill to climb for other NATO members, and particularly European ones, to become less reliant on the United States. It's also interesting to look at what Trump said here. He, of course, as always, is talking to his home base, to American voters. And before, they would have been rather unsettled by this cozy relationship he professes to have with Russia. Less and less is that the case. Americans are concerned about domestic policy above all, and very many of them say there weren't any invasions, there weren't any wars under Donald Trump. He's not a details man. He doesn't point out that there was COVID, there were other reasons. But it's very interesting to note he's talking to a domestic audience.
Now, during that Trump speech, what sparked these comments was Donald Trump mentioning how certain European states don't pay enough into NATO. Is he right here?
He is making a point and nurturing a point which Americans increasingly point out their frustration. NATO member countries have a target that they are expected to reach on spending. They're expected to spend 2% of their annual GDP on defence. 19 of them do not. And so he has a point in that respect, and he is saying, this is how I'm going to push them to pay. It's interesting to note that those countries which border Russia or Belarus or Ukraine or Moldova all pay well above or mostly pay well above the 2%. Poland pays 3.5% of its annual GDP because it feels so very threatened. That's slightly more than the US, which pays around 3.5%. So yes, NATO members do need to pay more. Some of them, after being berated before in Trump's first term, have upped their payments. But there are still concerns over that. And no doubt his point will be listened to in that respect. Joe Biden has gone an awful long way to restoring NATO's other members' faith in the United States. But they're all too well aware that if Trump gets back into the White House, or if a future president thinks similarly, Europe cannot rely on the US.